Most people believe serial killers spend life behind bars. Some are executed, some die in prison. But around the world, a small and disturbing group did something else. They walked free. Not because they were innocent, but because of plea deals, sentence limits, parole laws, or judicial decisions. These are not rumors. These are court-documented cases. This is killers that walk free. Charles Sobhraj was born in 1944 to a Vietnamese mother and an Indian father. From an early age, he learned how to lie, manipulate, and disappear. By the early 1970s, Sobhraj had reinvented himself as a gem dealer and traveler along Asia's hippie trail. His targets were young Western backpackers, isolated, trusting, and far from home. He befriended them, offered help, invited them into his inner circle. Then he drugged them. Victims were poisoned, strangled, or burned alive to destroy evidence. Their passports were stolen, their identities reused. Authorities across Thailand, Nepal, and India struggled to track him. Each time he was arrested, he escaped. Sometimes by faking illness, sometimes by bribery, sometimes by sheer manipulation. This earned him his nickname, the Serpent. In 1976, he was arrested in India and convicted of murder and robbery. But Sobhraj played a long game. He deliberately delayed trials and extradition requests, knowing that once his sentence ended, other countries would lose jurisdiction. After his release, he vanished, until 2003, when he was arrested again in Nepal. This time, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life. But even that wasn't the end. In December 2022, Nepal's Supreme Court ordered his release, citing his age, good behavior, and health concerns. He was deported to France. Charles Sobhraj is alive and free. Pedro Rodrigues Filho grew up surrounded by violence. By age 14, he had committed his first murder. What followed was a killing spree that would span decades. Pedro claimed he was targeting criminals, drug dealers, rapists, gang members. Brazilian courts confirmed at least 71 murders. One of his most notorious acts was killing his own father inside prison. After learning he had murdered Pedro's mother, he was sentenced to more than 120 years. But Brazil has a sentencing cap. No matter how many murders are committed, the law limits how long someone can be imprisoned. Pedro served approximately 34 years. In 2007, he walked free. After release, he became a media figure, giving interviews, appearing in documentaries, and even launching a YouTube channel where he claimed to discourage violence. He was later rearrested for weapons charges and released again in 2018. For years, one of the most prolific killers in Brazilian history lived openly. Pedro Rodrigues Filho was murdered in 2023. But for decades, he walked free. In the early 1990s, Canada was shaken by a series of brutal murders. At the center were Karla Homolka and her husband, Paul Bernardo. Together, they abducted, assaulted, and murdered teenage girls. One of the victims was Karla's own sister. When police closed in, Karla portrayed herself as a victim, claiming she was abused and coerced. Prosecutors believed her. In exchange for testimony, she was offered a plea deal. She pled guilty to manslaughter and received a 12-year sentence. Only later did investigators discover videotapes showing Karla actively participating, but the deal was legally binding. In 2005, Karla Homolka was released. She changed her name, married, had children, and re-entered society. Her release remains one of the most controversial plea bargains in modern legal history. Pedro Alonso López targeted young girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. He lured them away from villages, assaulted them, and murdered them. He confessed to over 100 killings and claimed more than 300. Mass graves were uncovered. López was convicted in Ecuador, but Ecuadorian law at the time capped sentences at 16 years. Regardless of victim count, he served approximately 14 years. In 1994, Pedro Alonso López was released. Shortly afterward, he disappeared. There is no confirmed death record. One of the most prolific serial killers in history vanished, and may still be alive. In Cape Town, young boys began disappearing near train stations. Fear spread through communities. Norman Afzal Simons was arrested and convicted for the rape and murder of one child. Authorities believed there were more victims, but could not secure convictions. He was sentenced to 35 years. After serving the minimum required term, he became eligible for parole. Despite public protests and warnings from criminologists, parole was granted. In 2023, Norman Simons was released under supervision. He is alive and no longer behind bars. Louis van Schoor worked as a security guard in South Africa during the final years of apartheid, a period marked by racial violence, deep inequality, and widespread abuse of authority. Van Schoor claimed he was protecting private property from intruders. Investigators and prosecutors told a very different story. Between the late 1980s and early 1990s, Van Schoor shot multiple black civilians, often at night, often while on patrol. He routinely described the killings as self-defense. Courts did not always agree. Van Schoor was convicted of 7 murders. Police investigations linked him to dozens more deaths, though many could not be proven beyond reasonable doubt due to missing witnesses and the political climate of the time. He showed little remorse, once stating that he slept well, knowing he had done his job. In 1992, Louis van Schoor was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but South Africa's parole laws allowed early release for good behavior. After serving just 12 years, Van Schoor was granted parole. In 2004, he walked free. Today, Louis van Schoor lives quietly in South Africa, one of the most controversial releases in the country's criminal history. In 1977, New Orleans was gripped by fear. Over a period of months, people were attacked at random in the French Quarter, stabbed without warning in public places. The attacks left the city terrified and on edge. Police eventually arrested Warren Harris Jr., a local man with a history of violent behavior. He was convicted of murder and attempted murder and sentenced to life in prison. For decades, Harris remained behind bars. But over time, sentencing laws in Louisiana changed. Mandatory life sentences began to be reconsidered under new parole eligibility rules for long-term inmates. After more than 40 years in prison, Harris's sentence was commuted. In 2024, he was granted parole. Warren Harris Jr. walked free, a man convicted in one of New Orleans' most infamous crime waves, released decades after terrorizing a city. José Paz Bezerra operated in Brazil during the 1960s and 1970s, primarily in São Paulo and Pará. He targeted women, strangling them and leaving their bodies in public spaces. His crimes earned him the nickname, the Monster of Morumbi. Bezerra was eventually arrested and convicted of multiple murders. Brazilian courts sentenced him to 100 years in prison, but Brazilian law places a strict cap on incarceration. At the time, no prisoner, regardless of how many murders they committed, could be held for more than 30 years. Bezerra served the maximum. In 2001, he was released from prison. After his release, he changed his identity and disappeared from public view. There is no confirmed death record. José Paz Bezerra is believed to still be alive. Richard Biegenwald was a violent offender from New Jersey with a long criminal history. By the late 1950s and 1960s, he had murdered multiple people in cold, calculated attacks. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. But in 1975, parole boards deemed him rehabilitated. Richard Biegenwald was released. Within a short time, he killed again. His release became a textbook example of catastrophic parole failure. He was rearrested, convicted once more, and returned to prison, where he remained until his death. For a brief but deadly period, a known serial killer walked free and claimed more lives because of it. Jarlene Gallego and her husband Gerald Gallego terrorized California in the late 1970s. Together, they abducted young women, assaulted them, and murdered them. Charlene was not merely present, she participated. When arrested, she cooperated with authorities. In exchange for testimony against her husband, she received a plea deal. She pled guilty and was sentenced to 16 years in prison. In 1997, Charlene Gallego was released. She changed her name, altered her appearance, and disappeared into civilian life. Her exact whereabouts are unknown. Between 1983 and 1989, a group of nurses working at Vienna's Lainz hospital murdered elderly and vulnerable patients. They used overdoses and medical methods designed to look like natural deaths. Dozens of murders were proven in court. Some estimates suggest the real number may have been higher. The group included Waltraud Wagner, Irene Meyer, Stephanie Meyer, and Maria Gruber. They were arrested, tried, and convicted in the early 1990s. Despite the scale of the crimes, Austria did not impose permanent incarceration. Over time, parole eligibility applied. By the late 2000s, every member of the group had been released, all reintegrated into society. Waltraud Wagner was widely regarded as the leader of the Lainz Angels of Death. She openly admitted to killing patients and described the murders as acts of control and relief from boredom. She was sentenced to life imprisonment. But even life sentences in Austria allow parole consideration. In 2008, after serving approximately 20 years, Waltraud Wagner was released. She vanished from public records. Her current whereabouts are unknown. These cases are not urban legends. They are documented, they were adjudicated in court, and every one of these individuals, through law, loopholes, or leniency, walked free. If you would like to see more content like this, like and subscribe.